Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where today I'm going to be describing Minolta's very first SLR camera, the mighty SR2, which was released by Minolta way back in 1958. For those of you who are new to my channel, I sell vintage Japanese cameras in my online store, japanvintagecamera.com. I have an Etsy store, which is also called Japan Vintage Camera, so if you'd like to buy this old Minolta or another vintage camera, please visit one of my stores. I'll post links to my stores in the description below the video. So 1958 was a very big year in photography. This was the time when a lot of new technology was being released and a lot of new cameras were hitting the market. Olympus, of course, had just released its PIN half-frame camera. Pentax had just released their AP camera. That was their first modern SLR camera. Canon was releasing their Canon Flex SLR, and of course the mighty Nikon F was just getting ready to hit store shelves. With all these cameras from these makers coming out at the same time, it was very important for them all to come up with something really good. And the SR2 was, I guess, Minolta's niche in this very competitive market. They invested a lot of time and effort in the engineering and manufacture of this camera, and they were really worried about how successful it would be. Of course, all the makers at that time had the same concerns, but luckily for Minolta, the SR2 turned out to be a popular camera. It was successful in the marketplace, and it became the foundation for the very successful SR series and later on the SRT series. Which ended up being produced for almost 2 decades after this camera first hit the market. It was an interesting time for photography. Besides the wide variety of cameras and technology and lenses and other things that were being introduced, there was a lot of competition in, I guess, pricing and such. And besides making a high-quality camera, Minolta kind of increased their market share with this camera by making it less expensive than some of its competitors. This camera was about $50 less expensive than the Canon Flex and a little more than $100 less expensive than the Nikon F. Still, at $250 back in 1958, it was not an inexpensive camera. Today, $250 doesn't sound like a lot of money, but for example, my parents' home, which was a rather large home on 13 acres of land, their mortgage every month was $30. So figure if you have a $30 a month mortgage, $250 is a very significant amount of money to spend on a camera. And of course, if it's the more expensive cameras of those days, it's of course that much more out of reach for a lot of people. But yeah, despite the price, photography was quite a popular hobby in those days, as it is now, though nowadays we tend to stick more with our phones than we do with regular cameras. And there was enough demand for this camera that not only did they sell a lot of these, the SR series, as I said, remained popular for nearly 2 decades. So let's go ahead and take a look at the features, controls, and functions of the SR2, and we'll go ahead and start at the top. We have the film rewind knob located here in the usual position. We have a nice long pop-out lever with a roller tip, which makes it easy to rewind the film. We have this really odd location for the film counter window. This is something that was brought over from the old rangefinder cameras, the V2 and V3, which also had the film counter on this side. I'm not sure about the logic of putting the film counter on the left side. It's much more difficult to put it over here than it is to put it closer to the winder. But I think this is something that Minolta did to kind of balance out the top, not to put everything in one space, to kind of like even out the controls and make a little bit of a cleaner design, or maybe just to make their camera look different from the other cameras which were on the market. Over here we have the shutter speed dial, and this shutter speed dial is very similar to the one which comes on the Minolta 2B and earlier rangefinder cameras, and that is you have to pull up on the button before, or pull up on the knob before you change the shutter speeds, whereas on other cameras of the time you just simply turn the knob as it is. This is kind of an interesting safety feature because you can't accidentally knock the shutter speed out of position. But on the other hand, if you aren't familiar with one of these, you might be forever trying to get it to work and you can't get it to turn. You just have to lift it up and turn it and it will work fine. On the bottom here we have the letters LV in yellow, and we have matching LV numbers around the shutter speed dial. LV stands for light value. This camera wasn't available with a built-in light meter, and they didn't come out with a proper accessory light meter until the SR1 was introduced. It might seem kind of strange they would bring out the SR2 before they brought out the SR1, but Japan and Asia, they have this kind of thing with numbers and lucky days and things like that, and perhaps the year and the numbers and the way it worked out in the release date, it just wasn't lucky to bring out the SR1 first. They brought out the SR2, but the SR2, as I said, has these LV numbers or light value numbers located around the shutter speed dial, and if you're using a handheld light meter, you would read the light value on the light meter, and you would adjust the shutter speed to match the light value on the meter, and then just use the aperture which the light meter recommends. It's a kind of simple system and works well together with the light meter or light value system. Over here we have the shutter release button, which accepts a standard cable release, and of course we have the film winding and shutter charging lever. This camera isn't as light and smooth operating as some of the other SLR cameras at the time, but this camera was designed for rugged professional use, and it featured a really solid and sturdy mechanism on the inside and a little bit heavy, and that kind of increased the operating effort of the camera. Some cameras, they get harder to use over the time just because things dry up and the lubrication dries. This camera, it's supposed to be a little bit firm, and you can tell it's a reliable camera because this camera here I just took out of its original case after who knows how many decades it's been sitting there. I wound it and fired it and it just started working, so obviously to still be working after so much time, especially after 20-30 years sitting in its leather case, it just shows it's a very well made and rugged camera. Moving to the back here, we have the viewfinder eyepiece. This has a threaded nut which goes around the back, and if you remove this nut you can attach a flash shoe. You remove the nut, attach the flash shoe, then put the nut back on, and that allows you to attach a flash gun to the top of the camera. You can also attach diopter lenses or an eye cup in the same place, or a combination of all three. These were extra cost accessories which were available from Minolta at the time, and these cameras, sometimes I come across them with the flash shoe, sometimes not. Here we have a reminder dial for the film speed. This has no effect on the operation of the camera. This is just to remind you what kind of film and what speed film you have inside the camera in case you happen to forget, which the best of us have done from time to time. On the bottom of the camera, we have the release button, which you have to release in order to rewind the film. We have a standard 1/4-inch tripod socket, and right here we have this kind of odd black thing, and this camera was supposed to be sold in tandem with an accessory motor drive or a motor drive option, which Minolta advertised that they were going to sell, but which they actually never made. And I guess the design didn't work or something like that. The cameras were more or less made to be able at one time to be modified to accept a motor drive, kind of like the Olympus OM cameras when they came out, but the motor drive never materialized, and so this whole serves no purpose other than just to kind of some curious I guess relic of something that was supposed to happen but never did. Moving to the front of the camera, we have the self-timer on this side here, and you simply pull the lever down and you push the release lever here, this round button, toward the lens, and that will release the self-timer. If you're using the flash or a flash on this camera, we have a couple of sync sockets located here. As I said, you can use an accessory shoe adapter for the top, or you can just simply use a flash bracket and plug in your flash here. You can use a modern flash with this camera, but you have to use the flash sync speed. You would have to set the sync speed to this here, which looks to be about 1/50th of a second, 1/40th of a second. Moving to the front here, we have the lens. This was the original Auto Rocore PF lens, which was kind of a semi-automatic lens. It wasn't a fully automatic lens like the later MC and MD Rocore lens, though it has the same design as the earlier MC Rocore. This camera, what you would do is you would set the aperture, and the odd thing about this aperture ring is it has a lock button here, so you can't accidentally turn the aperture ring. You turn the aperture, and when you set the aperture and you wind the shutter, it opens up the aperture, allowing you to focus clearly and brightening up the viewfinder. And when you depress the shutter, as you can see, you probably noticed that the aperture blades closed. They don't reopen by themselves until you wind the shutter again. So it's not a true fully automatic system like a Nikon F or some of the other cameras which were released after this, but it does work pretty well, and it's an improvement over the system which was used on the earlier preset lenses like the Pentaxes and things like that. For people who are using this camera, for the first time, if you're shooting in a small aperture and you focus and you take a photograph, and you continue looking through the viewfinder, you're going to notice it gets quite dark, and that's because the aperture is closed down. Simply wind the film. That will open up the aperture and brighten up the viewfinder and make it easier to focus again. Of course, on here we have a couple of things. On the aperture ring, we have the aperture numbers, and of course we have light value numbers. So you can use this camera in kind of the aperture priority mode by choosing a light value number for the aperture and then selecting the shutter speed according to whatever is recommended by your light meter. So it's a full manual camera, but it has these kind of like odd quirks, these mechanical old analog quirks, which are I guess cutting edge technology at the time, or convenient at the time, but are so primitive that many of us now can't understand how they work. In front of that we have this ring here, and this is the depth of field scale, which shows how much depth of field you have at any given aperture. And we have this red mark here, which is your focusing point if you're using infrared film, because the infrared film focuses on a little bit different plane than the standard negative or slide film. And in front of here we have the focusing ring, and we have a focusing scale which is arranged in both meters and feet. This camera has surprisingly close focus to less than a half a meter, which is pretty close for cameras in the day. You couldn't get that close on a rangefinder camera, and of course you couldn't focus as accurately. So this is a pretty good lens. You can get a little bit more close to people and such than you can with similar cameras at the time. Overall, this is a really cool and interesting camera, a real piece of Minolta history. This particular one is one of the first few hundred made. The serial number is 1111346. Most of the cameras which were made were silver. A handful were made in the black paint finish. I'll have this one listed for sale in my stores shortly. If anyone is interested in the black paint version, I know a guy who has one which is available, though he's asking a fair amount of money for it. But when you consider how rare those particular, the black paint ones are, it's probably a fair price. And when you consider that these cameras are going up in value rather than going down in value, probably a pretty good investment. This is a good camera for someone who wants a fully mechanical camera, something that not everyone is carrying, something which comes with a really good lens, and is just a good, rugged, and reliable retro piece from 1958. But anyway, I'm running out of time here. I've got to go and do some things. I'm going to have to cut this video off now. I plan to be making more videos about more cameras. I've got something which is really, really interesting, which I'm expecting to come in at any time. A really rare and unique Pentax camera for you Pentax fans. If you want to see that, please subscribe, and that way you'll know when the video is posted. If you click the like button, that helps me get more people interested in this channel and into old vintage cameras and film photography in general. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.